What if the heaviest thing you are carrying is not visible at all? There is something you are still holding. You may not call it by name. You may have convinced yourself that you have moved on, that time has done its work, that you are fine. But it is there, in the way your jaw tightens at a certain memory, in the story you still tell yourself at night, in the quiet resistance you carry like a stone in your chest that you have simply learned to walk with. You are holding on. And you do not yet know why letting go is not the end of something. It is the beginning. It is the moment where life stops being repetition and starts becoming movement again. We have been taught, in ways both subtle and direct, that holding on is a virtue, that loyalty means never releasing, that love means never forgetting, that strength means enduring the weight without complaint. And so we grip our grief, our anger, our old identities, our expired versions of people we once knew, as though releasing them would mean we never cared at all. As though the proof of our depth is found in how much we are willing to suffer to keep something close. But this belief quietly turns devotion into imprisonment, and memory into a chain we mistake for meaning. But the Stoics asked a different question. Not, how much can you carry? But what is actually yours to carry? Marcus Aurelius returned to this question again and again in his private writings, not because he found it easy, but because he found it necessary. He understood that the mind, left unexamined, will attach itself to anything with the same blind ferocity. It does not distinguish between what nourishes and what destroys. It only knows the familiar weight of what it has always held, even when that weight is slowly shaping your entire life into exhaustion. Epictetus made the distinction that would become the backbone of all Stoic practice. Some things are within our control and some things are not. This is not a passive resignation to fate. It is a radical act of clarity that cuts through illusion. To understand what is truly yours, your judgments, your intentions, your responses, and to understand what never was, the opinions of others, the passage of time, the choices of people you love, is to begin the only kind of freedom that cannot be taken from you, because it was never owned by the world in the first place. The ship that has already sailed does not return because you stand at the dock. The year that has passed does not reverse because you replay it. The person who has changed does not become who they were because you refuse to accept who they are now. This is not cruelty. This is the nature of existence, fluid, impermanent, indifferent to our need for permanence. The Stoics did not call this loss. They called it reality. And they believed that reality, met honestly, was the only ground worth standing on, even when it feels like it removes everything you once depended on. Grief is not the problem. Grief is honest. What the Stoics were concerned with was something quieter and more corrosive. The refusal to let grief complete its movement through us. When we hold on past the natural arc of mourning, we are no longer honoring what we lost. We are using the loss as a way of staying somewhere familiar, even if that somewhere is painful. Pain, at least, is known. The unknown of a life beyond the grief, that is what truly frightens us, more than the loss itself ever did. Marcus Aurelius lost people. He lost children, friends, colleagues, teachers. He wrote about impermanence not as a distant philosophical exercise, but as a man acquainted with real absence. And yet he returned always to the same conclusion. that to rage against the nature of things is to spend your life in a war you cannot win. Not because the loss is unimportant, but because your resistance to the loss adds suffering to suffering without adding meaning to either, only prolonging what already happened. There is a particular cruelty in the idea that letting go means you did not care enough. We absorb this belief early, and it calcifies into something that feels like loyalty but functions like a trap. The truth that Stoicism offers, quietly without fanfare, is that care and release are not opposites. You can love something fully and still open your hands. You can honor a chapter of your life and still turn the page. The depth of your feeling is not measured by your willingness to be imprisoned by it, but by your ability to hold it without becoming it. Chrysippus, one of the great architects of Stoic thought, spoke of the logos, the rational order woven through all things. To live according to nature, he argued, was to live in accordance with this order, to move as life moves, to change as things change, to release what time has already released. The person who fights this current does not stop the river. They only exhaust themselves in water that was never still to begin with. Wisdom is not the refusal to feel the current. It is the choice to stop fighting it, and finally notice where it is already carrying you. What does it mean then to let go? It does not mean to forget. Memory is not the enemy. It does not mean to pretend the wound never existed. Wounds are honest teachers that mark where life has touched you most deeply. It does not mean to stop loving what you have lost. Love does not require an object to remain present in order to remain real. Letting go means releasing your grip on the idea that things should be different than they are, and stepping out of the argument you have been having with reality itself. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and the holding on is almost always an act of imagination. The anger you carry towards someone who has long since moved on exists entirely within you. They do not feel its weight. The version of a past self you mourn may never have been as solid as you remember. The future you are refusing to enter because the past feels safer. That future is not an enemy. It is simply unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity is where growth quietly begins, even when it feels like loss. Identity is one of the things we hold most fiercely. We cling to who we were, to roles that have expired, to stories we have outgrown, to versions of ourselves that once made sense in a world that no longer exists. The Stoics understood identity not as a fixed monument, but as a practice unfolding moment by moment. You are not who you were. You are what you choose to do, think, and value in this moment. The person who cannot release an old self is not being faithful to who they are. They are refusing to evolve into who they could become. There's a particular kind of holding on that masquerades as strength, resentment. We carry it like armor, convinced that releasing it would leave us defenseless, that forgiving means agreeing, that moving on means the other person wins. But the Stoics were precise on this point. Resentment is not armor. It is a fire you carry inside your own house. Every day you tend to it, you are the one who is burned. The person you resent, in most cases, has long since walked out the door and into their own life, unaffected by the smoke you keep inhaling. Marcus Aurelius wrote of his own anger with remarkable honesty. He did not pretend to be above it. He documented it, examined it, traced its edges. And what he found, each time, was that beneath the anger was something more vulnerable. A fear, an unmet expectation, a story about how things should have been. The anger was the surface. The holding on was the structure beneath it. To let go of resentment is not to excuse what happened. It is to stop letting what happened continue to happen every single day inside your interpretation of the world. The Stoics practice something called the view from above. The deliberate act of lifting your perspective until the particular weight you are carrying becomes visible against the vastness of time and space. Not to diminish it, but to see it clearly. From that height, the argument that consumed your week becomes a ripple. The loss that felt like the end of the world becomes one chapter in a story still being written. This is not detachment. This is proportion. And proportion is the beginning of release. The moment where suffering stops being infinite and becomes understandable. To release something does not happen all at once. This is perhaps the most important thing the Stoics understood about the inner life, that it moves at its own pace, and that wisdom means working with that pace rather than demanding it accelerate on command. You do not let go of a grief in a single afternoon. You let go of it in moments, in small, repeated acts of choosing not to return to the wound, not to rehearse the story, not to rebuild your identity around what was taken. Each choice is small. Together they become freedom. Letting go is, at its foundation, an act of trust. Trust that you will not disappear when the thing you have been holding dissolves. Trust that identity is not stored in suffering. Trust that the version of yourself waiting on the other side of release is not lesser, is not hollowed out by the absence of what you carried, but is, in fact, more fully present than you have been in years. The Stoics called this tranquility, not the absence of feeling, but the absence of unnecessary war within yourself. There will be people who misread your release as indifference, who confuse your peace with forgetting, who interpret your openness to the future as a betrayal of the past. Let them. The Stoics were clear that the opinion of others is not within your control and, more crucially, is not the measure of your virtue. You do not owe anyone a performance of your grief. You do not need to keep the wound open to prove that you once bled. Healing is not a betrayal. It is the most honest thing a person can do when they choose truth over appearance. What the Stoics were pointing toward, through all their discipline, all their philosophy, all their quiet private practice, was this: the things you hold do not define you. What defines you is the quality of your presence in each new moment. And presence requires space. The person whose hands are full cannot receive anything. The person whose mind is entirely occupied by what was can offer nothing to what is. Letting go is not emptying yourself. It is making room for the only life that is actually available to you, the one happening now. You have carried things longer than was necessary. Not because you are weak. Weakness has nothing to do with it. But because no one told you that release was allowed. That you could honor what mattered without being bound to it. That you could walk forward without walking away. The Stoics were not asking you to feel less. They were asking you to live more deliberately, more presently, more freely than the accumulated weight of everything you have refused to set down has permitted you to live. The open hand is not a symbol of indifference. It is the oldest symbol of readiness, of a person who has made peace with impermanence and chosen in that peace to remain fully alive. This is the Stoic vision of strength, not the person who holds everything together through force of will, but the person who has learned, slowly and honestly, what is worth carrying and what was never theirs to bear. That discernment is a lifetime's work, but it begins with a single, quiet, courageous act of opening.